Today, the sell-off in Chinese stocks continuing. International investors likely spooked by the Chinese regime's treatment of private businesses like Didi. We ask how big the problem is for China. American Airlines warns about jet fuel shortages around the United States. How could it impact flights? We hear from a jet fuel supplier. And Tesla shatters the new record. Not only did it finally make a profit from selling cars, its profit was 10 times higher than last year. That and much more, coming up at NTD Business. Good evening, great to have you with us. I'm Paul Graney. United Parcel Service UPS shares fell to a 3-month low today. Investors likely worried that delivery growth from the e-commerce boom could be fading. The company says second quarter domestic volume fell 2.9%, with UPS Ground, that's largely e-commerce deliveries, dropping 4% from a year earlier. UPS had benefited during the health crisis as more people shifted to ordering online. Just like its rival FedEx, it also added surcharges, which boosted profits further. Its quarterly revenue did jump almost 15% this quarter, beating estimates. But executives say domestic volume could be under pressure in the second half of the year as some shoppers return to in-store shopping, and the supply chain disruptions that are still happening could impact business too. And Starbucks is quitting its joint venture in South Korea. It's the firm's 5th largest market, did you know? But it didn't give a reason why. Starbucks is selling part of its stake to its local partner retailer Emart, which will now operate the stores. The rest is being snapped up by Sovereign Wealth Fund from Singapore. Starbucks Coffee Korea has more than 1,500 stores across 78 cities. Its operating profit jumped nearly 3/4 over the January to March quarter. The whole business valued about $2 billion. Starbucks says the deal would be completed in just 90 days. And back in the U.S., stocks closed lower on Wall Street, pulling major indexes back slightly from the records that they set yesterday. Weaknesses in big tech stocks was the biggest factor for the decline. The Dow fell 86 points, about 0.25%. S&P 500 lost 21 points, less than 0.5%. The Nasdaq dropped 180 points today, about 1.2%. And a Chinese ride services firm backed by Jack Ma's Ant Group is scrapping its plans for initial public offering in the United States. Hello Inc. says it no longer wants to float its shares here in America. Comes as China cracks down on U.S. Chinese companies listed in America. It also comes at the same time that a top official at the SEC said Chinese companies listed on American exchanges must disclose any risks related to the Chinese communist regime interfering in their businesses, like we've seen recently. Chinese authorities recently launched a probe into ride-hailing giant Didi after the company's spectacular debut in the New York Stock Exchange late last month. But that regulatory clampdown puts pressure on its prospects. So, Beijing's cracking down on private companies, and that is sending shockwaves through the stock markets. The blue-chip Chinese CSI 300 index plunged 3.5% today alone. The Hang Seng Tech Index in Hong Kong tumbled almost 8%. It's lost 17% in just the last 3 days. Now, traders fear that the crackdown will spread to other sectors. NTD's Colin Fredrickson asked an expert what investors should do next.
Investors who hold Chinese stocks are facing growing risks while Beijing keeps cracking down on private businesses. Chinese tech companies just lost hundreds of billions of dollars in market value, and the sell-off hasn't ended. Joseph Trevisani, senior analyst at FX Street, says that the Chinese regime is concerned about losing control.
Tech companies control a lot of information access in China, and China is not a free or open information access society. And this is a direct threat.
And on top of that, he says the regime wants to avoid public unrest. Current inflation rates might generate objection among Chinese consumers.
So I think one of the things that they're trying to do with the crackdown is to frighten companies into not raising prices so that they don't have this flooding out into the consumer economy.
Oliver Jones, senior markets economist at Capital Economics, says these events show that the authorities are more willing to upset investors than before. And large investors have already started to unload their shares. Cathie Wood cut holdings to less than 0.5% this month. The sell-offs and drastic moves show the decline in investor confidence. After targeting tech companies, Chinese officials recently turned to the education sector. Fast-growing tutoring companies are now barred from turning a profit and from raising funding on stock markets. Tencent dropped 9% in Hong Kong and has hit its worst day in a decade. And now Chinese regulators issued new guidance for food delivery workers, shortly after shopping platform Meituan plunged. Tencent, Alibaba, and Meituan combined have lost almost $240 billion over the last 48 hours. But Trevisani says investors should not pull out of Chinese stocks just yet.
It's not something that is developing sort of organically in the economy. It's a top-down, ordered change in behavior and a warning. That will eventually be withdrawn.
He says once that has happened, the Chinese stock market will likely revert to normal economic behavior. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
The Institute of International Finance says China's equity markets suffered outflows of $600 million Tuesday after bleeding $2 billion on Monday. It seems like that sell-off in Chinese stocks is spilling over into Chinese bonds, even the Chinese yuan. So just how serious is this for the Chinese economy? Asked Daniel LaCalle, he manages $6 billion of assets at the Tresses hedge fund.
I think it's very serious. If we think about the Chinese economy and the Chinese stock market, it is absolutely crucial for Chinese companies to have the United States stock market investors looking at their bonds, at their equities, and investing, because there is a tremendous amount of debt that has been issued, and also an incredible amount of debt that is going to be issued in the next years. So if the United States investor base is outside of the scope for Chinese companies, be it because there's lack of transparency, because there's lack of credibility, or because of government intervention in companies that is showing that government disregard for investor security is quite high, then what happens is that not just Chinese companies will not just lose the U.S. investor base, but they will also lose a significant chunk of the other developed economies' investor bases as well. The Prime Minister was prolonged without a date. Since then, what we have seen is that the Chinese economy, instead of opening, has been closing, has become a lot more intervened. The government is much more present in the daily activity of businesses than what anyone would assume in an economy that is opening up, and that and we have seen very significant problems of corporate governance arising from government intervention in the private sector. So it doesn't come as a surprise. I think that what investors are starting to realize is that the historical view that higher growth would compensate for the limits of corporate governance and government intervention, that equation doesn't add up anymore. And we're seeing it in the valuations of both stocks and bonds.
And Tesla hit a big milestone and broke a new record today, posting over $1 billion in net income for the quarter. It comes despite that global chip shortage, so how did they do it? NTD's Colin Fredrickson reports.
Tesla had a record quarter, with profits skyrocketing past $1 billion for the first time. It produced and delivered a record 200,000 vehicles.
Auto gross profit and margin, excluding credits, increased substantially. This was primarily driven by better cost optimization across our factories, good execution against our cost reduction plans, as well as increases in production and delivery volume.
CEO Elon Musk discussed the chip shortage, saying our growth rates will be determined by the slowest part in our supply chain. He says their second quarter achievements came from an immense effort of substituting alternative chips.
It's not just a matter of swapping out a chip. It was an incredibly intense effort of finding new chips, writing new firmware, integrating with the vehicle, and testing in order to maintain production.
Financial analyst Gordon Johnson, the founder and CEO of JLG Research, suggests what Tesla did was highly risky. He says it took a risk other automakers didn't.
When you effectively take new chips and put them into cars, if you don't do months/years of testing, which clearly Tesla did not, even in 1 week or 2 week testing, you may not actually figure out real world issues with the chips.
Meanwhile, Tesla is delaying its Semi until 2022 because of global supply chain challenges. And the Cybertruck may move from its alpha stage to its beta stage later this year. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
One indicator of consumer confidence rose to a 17-month high in July, with household spending plans rising, even with concerns about higher inflation. The index is from the Conference Board. It focuses more on the labor market. Another consumer confidence index from the University of Michigan, released earlier, showed sentiment actually falling in early July because of inflation concerns. This index focuses more on daily spending, like the price of gasoline. Other data out today shows business investment is also showing no signs of slowing down, despite supply chain issues. So-called durable goods orders rose 0.5% in June. And just when you think travel is getting back to normal, think again. Some U.S. airlines may have to actually cancel flights or maybe make extra rest stops because the industry is running low on jet fuel. NTD's Phil Zoe has the story.
It looks like flying and leisure travel is back in full swing, but not so fast. Airline seats might be full, but the fuel tank, that's a different story.
Supply shortage, and we're dealing with trucking shortage. So we've kind of had a perfect storm.
The problem can lead to airlines canceling flights or making extra stops on longer flights just to get fuel.
We are notifying the airlines, we are notifying the airports, and keeping them informed as to how much fuel we have coming to them daily.
Mark Haynes has been selling aviation fuel for nearly 40 years. He says for airports in popular vacation areas such as Idaho, Montana, and Utah, it could be a big issue. Besides shortage on fuel and truck drivers, aircrafts used to fight wildfires have also taken up a portion of the fuel supply.
We all understand that we're in this together, and we know that in order to make the economic system work right, we've got to keep the airlines supplied, we've got to keep the air ambulance operations supplied, and then the firefighting equipment.
Haynes says the industry has a tough 60 days ahead, but he expects things to get better in October, when he expects business travel to return and leisure travel to slow down. Phil Zoe, NTD News.
General Electric's operations are showing signs of a turnaround. The company said today that it saw unexpected positive cash flow in the last quarter. Now it sees that growing to as much as $5 billion this year. Investors eye cash flow because they see it as a sign of the health of GE's operations and its ability to repay its massive debt. A big cash cow for GE is the aviation unit. It provides jet engines, parts, and systems for commercial and military aircraft. That unit had been hampered by the health crisis as airlines grounded aircraft, but the company says the business is showing early signs of recovery. GE also says it's facing inflationary pressure for the remainder of the year. Company CEO says they're taking multiple steps to manage the inflationary pressure, including increasing prices, better sourcing of parts and raw materials, and elimination of waste and higher productivity. Lockheed Martin says that rising inflation and consumer demands could push up the price of the company's F-35A jet fighter for the first time ever. When it first came off the production line 15 years ago, it cost $221 million. But thanks to economies of scale and better know-how, the price of the model has fallen by 64% over the years. It now sells for around $79 million. But with inflationary pressures, along with consumer demand for added capabilities, could now reverse that trend. It's according to Lockheed Martin's chief financial officer, who says to expect a modest increase in the price of an F-39A. But there's good news for buyers of the B and C models. CFO says their prices will likely continue to drop or stay where they are. Not all of us are in the market for fighter jets, but many of us are paying rent. It's going up too. The fastest pace in at least 6 years, according to real estate app Zillow. Joe Carson spent 16 years as the chief economist at the investment firm AllianceBernstein. Asked him what accelerating rent inflation means for the overall economy, particularly as that rate is accelerating even faster. Zillow says rents are up 1.8% in the last month alone.
Well, certainly it's not transitory. Inflation this year, it's quite interesting. Chairman Powell and the Fed are facing something that Greenspan and company faced in 1994, a strong growth rebound and creating a lot of cyclical inflation. So far, the Fed has had a hands-off policy, not doing anything, and maintaining a very aggressive monetary stance. In 94, Greenspan didn't take any chances and tightened policy quite dramatically. So the different approaches are likely to give you different outcomes. When Greenspan tightened policy aggressively, the pipeline inflation never percolated to the consumer level. What you see with the rents and used car prices and food and energy prices, the hands-off approach is allowing it to percolate up to the consumer level. And inflation is the number one concern of consumers at the present time. So policymakers have to start to address this.
We see the Fed talking about not tapering at least until 2023. It's kind of the narrative we're hearing at the moment. Do you predict that prices will continue to rise until that actually happens?
Well, I don't understand the thinking behind that. We have inflation today. We have inflation tomorrow. How can you wait 2 more years to address the problem you have today? That's just creating an imbalance in the system that's even worse than we had any time in the last 20 years, and probably have to go back to the 1970s. Now, keep in mind, we're not measuring prices like we did back in the 60s and 70s. If we did that, reported inflation would be close to 10% today. So the inflation dynamics in the system are very, very severe and broad. And it makes no sense from a policy statement or a policy stance to wait 2 years to address the imbalance it's building today. The only way you kill inflation is by attacking the root cause, which is too much money chasing too few goods. And a supply response doesn't make any sense either. Think about what they're saying. They're saying we're going to increase production, hire more people, and that's going to lower inflation. That's creating more demand in the system. The other thing is that inflation is a tax or a cost to people. It is. But people are still going out and paying more for rent, more for used cars, more for homes, more for food. So it hasn't stopped the consumer. They're starting to build this into their expectations that this is going to continue. So the Fed has a problem on its hands.
If it is allowed to continue, as you mentioned, a lot of people are saying it's even worse than the 1970s already if you measure with this type of measure, the one they were using back then. If this is allowed to continue for 2 more years, what are the main effects? How are things going to look then?
Well, just look at history. No matter what type of inflation you have, whether it's in general inflation like the CPI, where there's house prices or asset prices like equities or the tech, you always have bad outcomes. The thing is, if you don't attack the root cause, it becomes a bigger imbalance, and the downfall is even more significant. See, inflation creates liquidity on the way up, and when it reverses, liquidity dries up very quickly. And so a lot of people that were paying higher prices now are underwater. And those higher prices are used for collateral to borrow, spend, whatever. And when they reverse, you see the downside effects of an inflation cycle. So I just don't understand the Fed's thinking anymore right now, because clearly no one should blame them about the fast growth and the inflation dynamics we have, but just to ignore it is very bad policy.
Joe Carson. Leaked data shows that many UK virus patients in the hospital only tested positive for the virus after they were admitted. Suggests virus patient classification could be misleading. Data obtained by The Telegraph shows that only 44% of patients tested positive before being admitted. Suggests the other patients were admitted to the hospital for other reasons but later tested positive for the virus. Means they could have picked up while they were at the hospital, or that their symptoms from the virus were too mild to be brought to the hospital. But all of these patients are being put into one category, leading people to think they were all hospitalized because of the virus. The UK government asked the agency to break down the data back in June, but the agency never published it. And still to come this evening. A restaurant in New York City wins a Guinness World Record for the world's most expensive French fries. What luxury ingredients make them so expensive? And a German wine co-op tries to recover whatever it can after floods devastate the region. How has it affected businesses and its members? That and more after this short break.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm gonna pass the savings directly on to you. For example, you get my 6-piece towel sets, regular $109.99, now only $44.98, or MyPillow dog beds for as low as $19.99 with your promo code.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit mypillow.com.
Secure, the true solution for your digital privacy and security. Secure is a private and secure messaging and email solution hosted in Switzerland, using military-grade encryption and Swiss privacy laws, giving you true privacy. Secure is 100% private and does not collect or sell any of your personal data. Secure's Helix technology connects you securely to our Swiss servers without the need of a VPN, guaranteeing privacy and security for all your communications. Secure Messenger doesn't require your phone number or any personal data that hackers target. Chat by Invites allows you to chat privately and securely with anyone outside of your secure network without the need for others to download Secure. Secure Send offers you a private and secure way to email anyone outside of Secure. You won't find this level of privacy or security on any other email or instant messaging application. Visit secure.com. Regain and protect your privacy today.
Recent floods in Europe have devastated a historic German wine co-op's business. They're trying to rescue what they can from the damaged barrels and bottles. NTD's Andrew Thomas reports.
The Maischoss Altena Wine Cooperative in Germany was founded more than 150 years ago and is believed to be the oldest organization of its kind in the world. But it was cut off by floodwaters in mid-July, leaving its cellars submerged in water and mud.
At the moment, I don't think I have any exact idea of how big the scale actually is. I can't give any figures or even dimensions. In any case, it is devastatingly threatening to the existence of our business. That has to be said quite clearly.
Now employees are trying to salvage whatever they can, but the prospects don't look good.
The barrels that were in the cellar, where there was actually wine in them, are probably no longer usable. We're now trying to save what can be saved. It affects our very substance, that's for sure.
The wine cooperative has 460 members. Half of them are grape growers and winemakers. Many of them may have lost everything in the floods.
There are many of them who are doing this as their main business, some of them as a part-time business. It is definitely a threat to people's livelihoods. And of course, it is dramatic because they basically have lost their homes and their livelihoods on top of it. So yes, that's devastating.
The village of Maischoss itself was cut off by the floods until a few days ago and could only get supplies by air. So the co-op hasn't been able to supply its customers for over a week. The floods killed at least 180 people in Germany and 31 in Belgium. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And the iconic Campbell soup can is getting a makeover. It's the can's first redesign in about 50 years. As you can see, the labels still have the famous red and white design, but the shadow is no longer on the logo, and the font is slightly changed too. The new labels are rolling out to store shelves. You should see them on a variety of Campbell's products soon. And in honor of the new labels, Campbell's is selling its first ever non-fungible token on the new label. Proceeds will benefit the nonprofit Feeding America. And a restaurant in New York City has earned yet another Guinness World Record for its over-the-top luxury French fries. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
Decadent, flavorful, aromatic. These are the world's most expensive French fries. The fries come with a rich, thick cheese dipping sauce, served on a Baccarat crystal plate setting with an orchid on the side. These creme de la creme pommes frites cost $200 a plate at New York City's famous Serendipity 3 restaurant.
Truffle, truffle, and truffle inside these fries. So, in other words, we have truffle oil, we have the fresh black summer truffles. The Mornay sauce, in other words, it's a cheese sauce, is meant to be a dipping sauce, which is infused with truffles in 1,000 different ways too. So, truffle is the main star here.
Serendipity's corporate executive chef, Frederick Schoen Kiewert, demonstrated how the pommes frites are made. First, the chef only uses high-quality chipperbeck potatoes. They're fried in pure goose fat. Afterward, the fries are seasoned in Guerin truffle salt and Urbani summer truffle oil. To top them off, shaved black summer truffles from Umbria, Italy. The Mornay sauce is just as elaborate. The savory cheese dip is made with organic udder cream, black truffle butter, and Gruyere truffled Swiss raclette. The dish is topped off with a sprinkling of 23-karat edible gold dust.
It's a thrice cooked process. So we do a first blanch inside Dom Perignon and a French champagne vinegar. We'll cool it down, and then we will then do the first fry, which is at 325 degrees, and then we will cool that down and finish it off at 375 degrees. So this process is really going to ensure that it has a crispy exterior and a fluffy interior.
This is Serendipity's 10th Guinness World Record, and there's currently an 8 to 10 week wait list for the creme de la creme pommes frites. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
As the latest business updates for today, you can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.